Hello, everybody. Glad you could join us today. I know that there are lots of irons in the fire across the division going on, and I just appreciate that you're all here. As Cassie mentioned, over 185 of you together on this Zoom, representing all of our FSD districts, our central office and partners from the Child Welfare Training Partnership, from Easter Seals, from Lund, from NFI, and from VCAP. We have attendees who are inclusive of operations managers, administrators, and direct service staff. You know, when COVID hit, we had no idea how many more folks we were going to be able to have participating on this virtual platform. And so it has been the silver lining that's provided an opportunity for us to engage so many more folks on our workforce. So I guess I could say thank you, COVID. I want to also extend a special thank you to the Family Finding Work Group, who operated as the planning team for the 2 family finding events. And I also specifically want to call out to Cassie Gillespie and thank her for her leadership. She's put in a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes to support the smooth running of our meeting today. I have no idea how much logistical stuff goes on behind the scenes with these Zoom meetings, and I've had an education, so thank you. I didn't say who I was. I'm Barb Joyle. I'm your System of Care Unit Director, and under the umbrella of folks I support is Joan Rock, our Foster Care Manager, Gailey Hopkins, our Adoption Manager, and Catherine Harris, our Post-Permanency Support Manager, as well as Tracy Casanova, our ICPC coordinator. And so this work around family finding has also fallen under the umbrella of the System of Care team. And so that's why you're hearing from me today, which is a little unusual. I want to just acknowledge, I know, you know, there've been some questions about why are we, you know, so focused on this right now, and I just want to take a couple of minutes to reiterate that. I think that, you know, we talked before about how critical it is for us to approach our work in this area collaboratively if we really want to hope to grow our engagement skills and sustain those skills over time with families to build the networks of support and promote safety and well-being. And to create a lifelong impact for families. And, you know, with all of the things that consumes our attention, I think, you know, we go in fits and spurts where we're really focused on one thing and then we focus on something else and then we get really focused again on something. And so this is just an opportunity for us to attend to this and hopefully be able to sustain some of our progress. We really, as a division, you know, want to get a better grip on what's working well. What are the barriers out there that you're facing so that we can support you in being systematic in how we address those barriers. Most of you are probably aware next month we will begin a period of looking at our focused outcome indicators related to working with kin. That indicator references the percentage of youth placed with a relative or fictive kin. And, you know, that's a good measure, but I'm going to challenge all of us to think beyond the percentages today. We know there's so much more to the story, you know, related to our work with kin. And I want you to think about what are some of the other things that you have ability to impact in that arena of working with kin. Not the things that take a ton of time or planning or resources, but the things that you personally can do today and tomorrow and next week to help kids and their families feel mattered. And that's a term that Bob introduced to us in May, and I'm stealing it and using it all over the place. So to help them feel mattered. I know that after the May presentation, a number of districts have you know, taken up family finding and having conversations about practice in their staff meetings. There have been conversations about how we as a division will work collaboratively with our CFS partners at Easter Seals and at NFI. I know that some of you have developed and are already beginning to implement strategies to shift practice. And I also know that some of you might be feeling a little bit frustrated because you intended to work on next steps, but haven't quite been able to pull that off with all of the competing demands that are going on. We get it. It's never too late to start. And so, today's the day to put a stake in the ground and do the next right thing around this. We hope today will inspire you to try some new things, to think about what are those small tests of change that you have the ability to impact yourself. We know that as a division, we have more work ahead of us, both technical and adaptive. We're having conversation now about, we have some additional consultation time available to us with Bob, and trying to just think through like what's the best use of that. So there may be some opportunities for subsets of this group to participate in that, and there'll be more to come about that. In addition to looking at outcomes, some of you are probably well aware that district directors and the Family Service Management team have been participating in the Leadership Academy for Middle Managers. We call it the LAM. It got a little waylaid by COVID, but we're trying to bring it back on track. And the LAM supports leadership to learn about effective change management by actually teaching the principles and walking through the change management process in tandem. And we, as a leadership team, determined that we were going to focus each of the change initiative projects on our work with kin. So your directors will be taking that up and hopefully engaging you all in the districts around, what is it that we think we need to do here about that. In addition to that, there's work going on. 9 of the districts have now been onboarded with the Diligent Recruitment Project. Obviously, central to that is our work with kin. So all of these efforts taken together will really, our hope is that it helps us to ensure that our values are translated into focused actions, that we're very intentional about it. We know that family connections are critical for healthy child development. Family members deserve the opportunities to restore hope in their kin, and children demand a sense of urgency. Those are some of our stated values. And so with that, I would like to introduce our host for today, Bob Friend. Bob is the director at the National Institute for Permanent Family Connectedness in the San Francisco Bay Area. Bob has worked in the field of child welfare for over 40 years, including as a direct line worker and manager in residential treatment settings, and as a family reunification worker, and as a social worker and supervisor for Casey Family Programs. I think it's safe to say he understands the dynamics that we're faced with. And so with that, I'll hand it back to you, Bob.
Thanks, Barb. Good afternoon, everyone. I see we're up to about 170 folks on, and I understand that there were some behind the scenes struggles for a few people to get on, so that's that's inevitable to happen a little bit. I want to echo Barb's comments about the planning and working with this entire group, and Barb isn't going to thank herself, but I want to thank Barb. With her, Barb and I connected months ago, many months ago, and to start talking this through. And as some of you may recall, we had planned to be together in Killington in May, and then COVID said no, and it turned out you all had a snowstorm that day. So it was probably very fortunate we didn't try to do that, because who knows who could have gotten there or whatever. Okay. Okay, I think we got it. Sorry for the delay.
That's good.
Here we go. So Barb went through the introductions. Real quick Zoom instructions for folks. Generally you're going to be muted. There'll be opportunities to unmute, and one of them is right now. So one of the tricks of Zoom is that even though everyone's muted, you can hold down your space bar to temporarily unmute yourself. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to give you 10 seconds, whoever is doing the muting behind the scenes, allow 10 seconds for folks to unmute themselves by holding down the space bar and saying hi to 2 or 3 people that you haven't seen in a while on this thing. Everyone's going to do it at once, so we won't ever be able to hear any random people. But so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go for it.
Bye.
Hi, Heather.
Unmute.
Hey.
Hi, Deb.
Hi, Hoover. Hey, everyone.
I didn't need to hold down the space bar. I just hit the unmute button.
Yeah, you can do that too. Just the space bar is a different trick. So, okay, so then let's mute everyone back up. We're going to do, Leslie Stapleton is going to be monitoring the chat box. So if you're having any questions, feel free to enter into the chat, and Leslie will alert us and me if anything is needed. But I will remind folks that when I'm in presentation mode, I don't get to see the chat. So you're gonna have to holler at me in some kind of way, break in. We're gonna do 3 breakouts. For breakouts 1 and 3, we're gonna do by region in the same way we did last time. And we're gonna allow for discussion in their handouts to guide for all 3 of the breakouts, which Cassie sent in advance. For breakout 2, we're gonna randomly assign about 4 people for breakout to do a skill practice activity. And I will prepare you all for that before we do that. That'll be sort of midstream, and we'll take a break right after breakout 2. There's whiteboard instructions with Cassie also handed out. Some of that, for some of you, that worked really well. Others struggled with it. If you don't feel comfortable doing the whiteboard, then, you know, handwrite notes and scan them and send them to Barb. Whatever works for you, just make sure. We want to capture your best thinking. And the feedback from last time was really helpful to get a sense of what you were working on, what you struggled with, and what you hope to accomplish. And then when you come back, just make sure you're muted. Sometimes people are having offline conversations and you don't want 150 people necessarily listening to them when you're having them. And if you're having an unstable internet connection, you can always use your phone for the audio for the Zoom meeting. So without any further ado, to echo Barb's, or to continue on with Barb's opening, is that, we want to continue on that path to improving engagement. And no matter what your initiatives are, engaging with your families and helping your families build the support they need to go well beyond any kind of child welfare involvement is always one of the primary opportunities and responsibilities for our work. So I'm going to go briefly over the May session, and then I'm going to give you all an opportunity. I think Tara reached out and asked some folks if they would be willing to share anything. She heard a resounding field of crickets, all echoing at once. But I'm going to give folks an opportunity if there's something that they just want to share for a minute or two about something they've tried. It doesn't have to be anything that was earth-shaking, but just something that they tried. We'll give you an opportunity to present. If no one takes us up on that, then I'll just move right along into the rest of the day. But I really want to encourage you all to step forward and share stuff, because that's the only way a learning organization works. You got to try stuff, and whether it succeeds or fails, you got to share it. So I want to encourage you along those lines. I will go in a little bit about what do we hope to accomplish today. I think Barb talked a little bit already about what we need for you. Obviously, when you're in your breakouts, it's going to be really important to engage and plan, or beyond planning, just do that self-assessment and engagement. Be curious, talk with each other, ask each other questions, challenge common assumptions, challenge the elephant, open up to the elephant of the room, any of that kind of stuff. I think that's really what helps, again, organizations learn and grow and not stay stuck in what you've always done. And then looking forward towards at the end of the day, it's like, how do we keep this momentum moving forward? So some of the key items from May in the presentation, I think one of the ones, right from the start is there's the recognition now that practices that unnecessarily isolate young people from their families are harmful and they're dangerous, and we have to stop doing them, and we have to stop doing them right away because we know they're harmful. So in your lens, I hope that you are talking about and thinking about, are we putting up barriers that disconnect people from their families? And if we are, how do we stop doing that and like cease and desist? Because that is harmful. There's sometimes real important safety reasons, but I think there have been way too many situations in which we have exponentially increased and the safety requirements for everyone based upon the worst case scenario. And so it's that constant thinking through about what is actually required for this family at this time, and not just thinking through about what's the worst that can happen. Urgency of building networks as the primary interventions to promote healing and well-being along with safety and permanence. And the research is like coming every day around the importance of love, belonging to networks as being at far outweighing. Bruce Perry and Kevin Campbell just recently did a TED Talk, and Dr. Bruce Perry just reaffirmed that there's like a tenfold increase in health and well-being when you have a relationship-rich network that provides love and belonging, sprinkled in with a little bit of education around trauma-informed practices, than the best trauma-informed practice with the best provider. Like, there's a tenfold better return on investment with the relationship-rich network than there is with the evidence-based practice by a provider. So it's not that the evidence-based practice isn't important, it's that we have to build networks. And that networks have to be one of our priorities, and that there's that recognition that we all have to have that without a network, young people are very subject to the isolation and the loneliness and all the bad outcomes from exiting care. And that's happening within care as well as exiting care. So building networks is one of the primary interventions, and how do we make more time to do that? Because it has the best return on investment. Third bullet, alignment is an essential element to successful practice, both within the department and between all the partners, including court, behavioral health, etc. So I put here, note to supervisors and managers. If you're a supervisor, as part of your regular supervision, you need to be talking about alignment. You need to be asking your workers about what their sense of the alignment with all their partners and with their family. And the alignment is to that fundamental belief that family are the experts in the lives of their kin and must be present to participate in the planning and decision-making and ultimately the support that young people need. And so if there are folks that aren't on that same page with you, no matter how good you are at family finding, it's going to get subverted. And so from a worker to worker sense, how do you continue to have those conversations to help people understand the importance of bringing family on board and engaging family well? From a supervisor to supervisor perspective, how do you help folks transmit the importance of this kind of practice? And manager to manager, how do you make sure your relationships are such that people recognize and can manage both down, up, and sideways the importance of the alignment, and that when you engage new partners, that's part of the conversation. Because if we're not addressing alignment, and there is in any one particular situation or many situations poor alignment, kids and families suffer. So not attending to alignment is almost acceding to allowing kids and families to suffer. So it's a really important aspect, and I want you to think about that in terms of how you practice and how you manage, okay? And then the fourth thing, Barb mentioned this briefly, the importance of mattering practice to encourage and welcome participation of family and connections who indicate a willingness to step forward and help, whether or not for placement consideration. So again, beyond the focus on placement, building networks and mattering people so that they understand that they are welcome and needed, essential to the support, love, and care. And not everyone has to show up to a meeting to matter people or to be mattered, right? Some people are good in meetings. Some people don't want anything to do with it, but they're going to do all kinds of things otherwise. That's okay. Just like historically, we used to ask, would you take placement? And if the answer was no, we'd have nothing to do with you. That's not okay. We want to stop that. And we want to include people in lots of different ways. One of them is to participate in actual planning decision-making, but there's many other things that families do. And sometimes families are having meetings without us, and that's a good thing. A, we can't stop it, and B, ultimately, that's the practice which we want them to have after it's no longer necessary for us to be involved. So how do we help them develop their relationships, their cohesion, so they can overcome whatever relationship barriers or conflicts are in the past and move forward with help, love, care, and support for the young person that's involved. So that's the direction where we're going. Okay. All right. So next slide is, we have some infographics and slides that were prepared with by a number of people, but I'm going to let Krista jump in and kind of teach us through these. I think she was the primary person that developed them. So take it away, Krista.
Hey, can I jump in really fast? Sorry to
Sure.
do that to you, Krista. Bob, while Krista's talking, can you reassign me primary host privileges if it doesn't mess up the thing, so I can work on breakouts and keep yourself as a host too? Okay, Krista, sorry.
Oh, that makes sense. So hi, everybody. This is data that was collected from the evaluations that you completed after the last training in this series in May. So many of you completed some type of evaluation, and the questions centered around the values that you hold, the practices that you are incorporating into your work, and the beliefs and perceptions that you have that are centered around family finding. So this infographic, well, it's actually several, and it was created by Professor Jessica Strolin-Goltzman out of UVM and myself, both separately and conjointly. And it's, in a sense, created to more bring some themes out of the data. So there will be graphs and numbers, but it's really built to pull out some takeaways and some themes to tell more of a story than just to give you some numbers. So here, as you can see this first slide, and we can share these separately. So if you're finding that this is difficult to read small on the screen, you'll get these in an email later. So the first takeaway is that it was overwhelmingly so that participants of the survey found that the values that you hold are in line with family finding values. For instance, all families can be some type of a connection for children and youth in custody. What's interesting also with the practices graph underneath is that this is kind of a way for you to, if you didn't take the survey, you could just compare what you would have answered to what other people did answer, but it's kind of a way to keep a pulse on how people are practicing in the state. So participants reported, sorry, just moving this to the side, a low rating on asking children for their views on placement decisions. And participants more often contacted schools and childcare providers and actually rarely contacted neighbors or emergency contacts. So that's just kind of some FYI. Bob, would you mind going to the next slide for me, please?
Sure. Here you go.
So you might have a box around this first sentence. I do. And if that's the case, I'll just read it. So the belief that this is one of the first themes that emerged from this data. So the belief that there is too little time for building family networks will ultimately increase workloads over time. So you might hear that and think that's a pretty bold statement, and I think that's a fair response. So I'm just going to unpack how we got to that, starting with the graph underneath. So as you can see with this graph, as caseloads increase, the amount of time prioritized for identifying kin really started to drastically decrease. With even just one case being added to your caseload, there was a 3 points. It was on a Likert scale. So there was a significant percentage drop in how much time was prioritized. So what I want to make sure is not the takeaway that's misconveyed from that statement is that if you are to just believe that you have more time, then you'll be able to work the case in a different way. Because I think that it's really fair to acknowledge that you are incredibly busy. And despite even working in a pandemic right now, you're doing amazing, amazing work. But the piece that I want to draw attention to is the word belief, because the idea there is the concept that your beliefs and your values really drive your actions and drive how you interact with others. So an action in this case would be an example of the types of questions that you might ask, the types of people and who you might include in the life of the case and who you might exclude. Bob, would you mind going to the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So starting family finding from the start of a case really touches on what Bob just summarized, that you're spending time from the beginning wrapping around the children and the youth, people who either already love that child or who have the capacity to love that child, or are at least willing to devote some energy, concern, or creativity when it comes to planning for that child, which is separate from making a list of people who are appropriate placements for that child. And the idea is that the data indicates that if you do these things, you'll actually spend less time finding new placements throughout the life of a case, less time finding emergency respite, and again, to support a placement, and less time spent creating a new support network for that youth, because in a sense, you've been building it all along. So the last theme that I'm just going to discuss is if family finding practices are incorporated into practice routines, it was found that there is a positive impact on workloads, permanency outcomes, and values alignment. So again, that's not saying that this is this magic wand that erases your workload, but it does, in a sense, shape and morph your workload so that it's more in line with the values that you identified in the survey, that you're doing work that fuels hope and fuels yourself and just really is in line with those values. And then also ultimately impacts permanency outcomes in a positive way. So that's really the main takeaways. So I guess I'll send it back to you, Bob. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Krista. I'm gonna end the slideshow so I can transfer the sharing or the full responsibility, the host responsibility back to
Cassie.
back to Kathy.
Hey,
Yeah.
Bob, while you're doing that, folks are seeing that little orange screen, that multiple window screen, and I know it's hard to remedy that from your end, but while you're out of presenter mode, just so you know.
Yeah, I see it, and
We can
Yeah,
play with it during the breakouts.
yeah, we can do that. Okay. It's not coming up for me where to, if I do on participants, it's not showing me where I'm full host in mine. I'm trying to toss it back to you, Cassie.
Yeah, if you hover over me,
Oh, okay. That's the issue.
that's where the mojo is.
Okay. There it is.
We're also giving out Zoom tips during this training.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, make host. There you go. Yes. Thanks for the reminder. All right, so I'm going to let first of all, Krista, great job on the slides. Thanks for identifying those and both preparing them and explaining them. And I think the contexting was really helpful. If Barb, if you have any comments or any things that connect with what you were originally saying, I'll give you the opportunity to kind of jump in. If not, I'll just kind of push on. Barb says she's good. Push on, Bob. Okay, so before we're going to jump to breakouts, I want to give folks an opportunity based upon what we were based upon the things that we worked on last time, has any of the regions had the opportunity? I know I've heard some good things about what you've done. So have you been able to try something, and are you willing to share, hey, we're trying this, we don't know how it's going to work out, or so far we've seen some really positive little signs, whatever. But I want to give you that opportunity to kind of jump in and say, hey, I'm willing to share something for a minute or two. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to unmute and jump in, or you can put something in the chat, that's fine. And we can respond to you. Otherwise, I'm going to push you to breakouts. So 30 seconds. The Jeopardy music is on.
I'll chime in. I'm from the Hartford district. And following the first presentation, we made an agreement to do huddles when we knew we were going to be preparing an affidavit and requesting some kind of court involvement. Typically, it would be removal of the kids. And as a result, we got busier too, which was interesting. So we had more opportunities to try it out. The first couple of times it was really hard, I have to say, to get into the momentum of thinking about that. So we were a little later in the game for, I think, the first two filings. But then a recent one, we did a huddle, and we knew this family quite well. We knew cousins and half siblings. And so we were really able to get a jump start, in my opinion, of how do we really assess all of these people and really find those connections for this very young baby. And we brought in our Easter Seals partners, part of that huddle. And so I think we came up with some really, what I felt like were really good next steps. And we're still moving along with that, with people reaching out to us, either, wanting to be placement or just a connection. And so I think that was a really good push. We had for years been doing monthly family finding meetings, but these are kids that shouldn't wait a month for us to have these initial conversations. So that's why we were doing the huddle. And then in a recent case, a teenager who had been placed with his sister, and it was not going to be something we could support long term. We had some meetings, and I don't know if I really would have called it a huddle, but we had a meeting with a lot of people and just really brainstormed, knowing that he's 16, he has some say, what is it that he's looking at? And interestingly enough, his half sibling, different fathers, not even a stepfather, but he stepped up, and there's a sibling of his. So it's his half siblings, aunt and uncle, that are that he's placed with now. So I think there was some really good work there as well done around thinking out of the box, that there's a real connection with these siblings, and now they're together. They're actually not together. I'm sorry, but they're together in certain sibling cousin way. They're seeing each other a lot, so it was a good outcome.
Yeah. Thanks, Kathy. That's I appreciate your stepping forward. Is there anything you all, after you've done a few huddles, is there anything about the way the huddles operate that different now that you're kind of, I'm not saying it's the first time you've done huddles, but it's sort of moving the huddles into this position. Is there ways you're making adjustments in the huddles that you're learning from that are helping, or is it just a matter of reps?
I think we just need to get into the momentum. I have to say, Bob, we know being working remotely has created, certain barriers. I think when we were all in our office and we were in the, I don't want to call it a crisis mode, but a time when we really had to step back and pause and make important decisions, we were all there together doing it.
Sure.
So if someone forgot to do something, the other person stepped up.
Right.
We have to just be much more intentional of how we're responding, and yeah, I think we're getting there. It's in our minds now to remember to do that.
That's a really important observation. A number of people I've talked to in different organizations say the thing they missed is just being around other people and hearing what's going on and being able to kind of jump in and help or chime in, or have somebody jump in with them and help and chime in. And that when when we're working from our homes or whatever, there's a few people in the office that they really missed that opportunity to engage and be supportive or feel supported. Yeah. And so as you say, being intentional is probably a really important aspect to translating what we're used to doing into this new environment. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And there was a good question that just came up on who is in our huddles, and Hannah from my office chimed in, and it's our resource coordinator, the front end and ongoing FSWs, Easter SEALs, and the supervisors and myself. So we have a good team that wraps around to think about these things.
Excellent. That was my next question too. So we're just on the same page about that. Perfect. So thanks, Kathy. I'll give 20 seconds now. Anyone else want to jump in? Not that you have to present in 20 seconds, but I'll just give you that opportunity to jump in. Who else would like to share something that they've tried? That was a great example.
I can share. This is Alex. I'm from St. Albans. I'm the district director there. And we started with something more technical. So we talked about, the need to increase our kinship care and our connections as an all staff. And we just wanted to start with something that seemed really simple, which was just making sure that we knew how to fill out the forms correctly, which actually measure kinship care. And we did that, and we learned that we were like 20% higher than what we looked like. So the hope was that that would really just motivate people to see what they are doing so that we could expand on that. Sorry? Oh, sorry. I thought someone said something. Yeah, so that was one thing we did, which just felt really good and really motivating. And then from that, we've had a smaller sort of work group in the district, and we've met 3 times just to talk about like the values associated with it, the workload associated with it. So we could really have a smaller group that starts to gain some momentum. And that's felt really good.
Any early conclusions, Alex, from that experience of gathering folks together and focusing on values and activities, actions, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think that what I really appreciated about this smaller group was we had 1 worker from each team join the group, and the supervisors and the resource coordinators, and people were really vulnerable and just shared like their levels of comfort in really delving into these conversations with families prior to custody, that they felt like no matter how they couched it, a family would really worry about like, you're saying this because you're going to take my kids.
Yeah.
And so we've just been talking about like feelings associated with that. We've shared ideas with each other for how to language things. We've invited our CFS partners, the folks from NFI, to be part of this so that they can help us. And, I think it's just started the discussion around the comfort level with really talking about connections with families prior to custody versus the comfort level post custody or during custody. And then also the different sort of questions we can ask that maybe aren't as pointed. And so we've gotten some resources around that, which have been really cool, really creative ways. Really, I think what's been most helpful, and some of the workers, they're on this training right now, so feel free to jump in, anyone. But really, I think sharing the ideas and experiences have been really, really cool for each other, because they're coming from 4 different teams. And so they have 4 different types of legal relationships, which really impacts power. And so just naming that has been great. And it's been a very inspiring group to work with.
That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. I think from a learning organization perspective, being able to periodically surface what's going on and the changes that you're finding, the surprises, the experiences, the things that you were just relating are going to be important to everyone. So that's the kind of thing that to grow your practice more systemically across all the regions, that if you all can be doing those things about what can you do by next Tuesday? What are the simple tests of change or PDSAs that one can do? just to try. And it started with, are we filling out the form or, accurately, right? And then it morphs into all different kinds of things based upon that observation and that reflection. And so that's the importance of just trying to do something a little bit different, because it spurs other kinds of changes and keeps people open to the possibilities. So thanks so much. Those were two excellent examples, double gold stars for both of you. So I'm going to shift now to the breakout section, and I'm going to actually show a different screen than this one, because it has the actual breakout for that's your handout. Here it is. All right, so you've received this handout from Cassie, and so these are the questions. I know there's folks that are assigned as facilitators, but I think everyone has received the questions. And so the first set of questions is around last time as a region or a sub-region, and for some of you, you had way too many people to have in one breakout session. We asked you to kind of scale yourselves from 0 to 5, 0 meaning, absent, to 5 meaning, complete, around the alignment, full alignment with the principle that any decision about a child coming into care or within care should not occur without family involvement. And so, has anything changed about your rating? And what have you done to improve alignment since we last met in May? So I think we're interested in hearing about that. So you can either do that on your whiteboard, or I created a little bit of space in here. If you want to type or write on this, then that's fine too. And then for the second set of questions, what's one action you can take to collectively, take to improve engagement and involvement with families that can provide tangible results we could discuss on today? So we heard two examples of that, right, that were just shared. So report what have you done, and rate your progress, and identified what are the key learnings. Like for some of you, it was we started on one thing and it jumped to another. For others, it was really hard to get to something, and there are a bunch of things in our way. Write all that stuff down. That's really important to understand, because what you want to be able to do in a month, 3 months, 6 months is not, well, instead of what we don't want to do, what you want to do is to be able to build on the experience and keep it going, because you want to avoid the fatigue, the initiative fatigue that Barb described earlier, that we're starting on this and now we're jumping to that and we're jumping to that. You want to really deepen the family involvement and the progress around this, so you have more children with kin, whether they're in or out of the system, right? And that those kin feel more supportive because there's networks in place and we're not isolating people, those sorts of things, because that will actually make the work easier. It's the kids that are really isolated and feel unsupported that are the highest behavioral needs down the road. It may not first look like that, but that's where that goes, because we're not meeting their needs. So, so identify that, and then I'm going to give you around, let's say till 11. So I'll give you till 11 to work on that. And then we'll bring you back and we'll do something on strengths, and we'll do a breakout there, okay? There may be a few, there's always some glitches with the first breakout. I think there's going to be way fewer than there were the first time. And Cassie has been working behind the scenes on that all morning and the week prior to do the best we can. But Cassie, I think you can go ahead, unless there are any comments or needs, and launch the breakouts. Okay, so
by 11 o'clock over here, you can all probably do math, but that's 2 o'clock. So come back at 2.
Sorry.
That's okay. All right. I'm going to be vulnerable with you all. I have significant anxiety about whether you're all going to go to the right place. And if you don't, I'll fix you after. Okay. But here we go.
Screen. and we'll come back. Okay. All right, so we went through the breakout session, A and B. Again, I'm curious if there's any key learnings or report of actions. Please feel free to type them into the chat box. So then strengths, intentional understandings. The idea around this this skill, it's sort of a narrative / collaborative practice that we have incorporated into our family finding training has been to move beyond that kind of flat. A lot of folks are doing what quote unquote strength-based practice, but the strength-based practice has been more of, we're going to start with identifying strengths, and then we're going to get into the problems. But what has to be present for actually be strength-based practice is that the strengths have to be part of the plan. Otherwise, it's not strength-based practice. And so the short version of what strength-based practice often looks like is that, oh, and I see that window is back, and I thought we took care of it. Oh, well. Sorry, we don't really know why that's coming up. So the short version of strength-based practice has unfortunately become, we're going to start with strengths. We're going to get a real superficial and non-relevant list of strengths, which are going to be pretty stagnant every time. We're going to spend less and less time about that because it's not really that important. And then we're going to go into all the reasons why we're meeting, which is all the problems that we're being confronted with. And sometimes the frustration that we have
Right.
with young
Kiss
people.
him, tell him that you love him, and we'll all say prayers, okay? Yeah. All right, bye.
So I muted everyone, and Bob, you have to unmute yourself to keep talking. Sorry.
Okay, I'm unmuted. So the idea here is with the strengths, this intentional strengths focus is to go beyond what these listing of internal strengths may be, and to also investigate beyond the abstract descriptions, the purpose, intent, values, beliefs, and origin of some of these strengths, because it's the agency that people take and utilize that is also important with the strengths. So a lot of times what we'll look at is when we ask for someone's strengths, we'll see, you know, they're really good at something. She is very such and such. He knows how to do this. They act in a particular manner. She makes other people. He has the ability to. They're very just sort of abstract descriptions, right? But there's an effect of these internal strengths understandings that there are some negative effects of that. And one is that it really eliminates or diminishes that sense of personal agency. That strengths, when they're just internal, eliminates the intentionality around living into the strengths. And we want to be able to capture that and understand that and be able to explore that. That they tend to isolate the person, that the strengths, you don't see the lineage and history and purpose of these connections and why they were there. And they often discourage diversity because they're abstract and generally pretty globalized and generalized, and they don't necessarily pertain to the rich history of that person and their connections or their culture, right? So by going into these intentional strengths, we can attract and learn more about those backgrounds and beliefs, which is part of the relationship development, and it's also a mattering practice because you're actually looking beyond what is generally and globally seen by asking some questions to get to know people at a different level. I think when you break out and do this, you will have some experience with folks, some of whom you may know. We're going to randomly group them, so we don't know who's going to go together. But you're going to learn stuff about the people that you're working with or that you're grouped with that you didn't know before, whether or not they're new to you or you've known them for years. And that's one of the advantages of this activity. So, so the strength list can include finding the ideas and actions for life that people can bring bear on in difficult circumstances that they find themselves in. And by adding to that list of internal strengths, it conveys the action that adds that agency of the young person or whoever it is that you're doing the practice with. This is not limited to young people. We're just examining that in that perspective, but you can do this with colleagues. In fact, many organizations where we've done some consultation and coaching with helping a particular organization function better together, doing these kinds of activities have really helped folks sometimes move past conflicts and get a better sense of what and why and what's important to other people. And so the third bullet there around practices, intentions, values, beliefs, hopes and dreams and commitment is sort of the progression that you go through in asking questions. And I'm going to take you through that, and your questionnaire will assist you in that regard. And then once we identify and we get these thicker, richer sense of people's strengths, they can be better utilized to bridge the gaps and achieve the goals than just that abstract description can. Because a lot of times people say somebody's good at sports or somebody's good at a particular thing, but when we get to their plan, there's no place for that to really come into play, and so then it's very deficit-based planning because the strengths aren't apparent. And so again, looping back to that original statement, what makes something strength-based practices? You see the strengths as part of the plan. And so as you're thinking about your plans that you've constructed with your families, if their strengths are not involved in there, then you're not achieving your desire of strength-based practice. So that's just sort of a mental note for yourself about to loop back and say, I wonder how many of the strengths are present and how can we do better to incorporate those strengths, whether the young person, the families, their networks, whatever that might be, okay? So I am going to end the slideshow and stop the screen sharing because Barb and I are gonna have a conversation about this. We're gonna demonstrate what this might look like, and we'll kind of take it through there, and then we'll break back into the groups of 3s and 4s, okay? So Barb, let's start with a strength that is present. Can you name a strength of yours related to the work that you do?
I am curious about everything.
Yeah? When did you first notice you were curious?
Well, it came out actually when I was a young child, and it was mostly called being nosy because I always had my nose in people's business. My brothers, my friends, like nosy.
Yeah, yeah. When you were in that sense of being curious, right? And so sometimes I got labeled like nosy, but there was other times, I'm sure academically, there were some really positive things about being curious. What were the reinforcers for you? Like why continue to be curious? Like there's some things we can do and they get extinguished because all the reinforcement is negative, right? So what were some of the areas in which you were rewarded or you felt really good about being curious?
When I was, I don't know, middle school aged, I was part of this program and we traveled around the United States and we were meeting people and learning about culture and geography and all that stuff. And I found that stuff fascinating. Mm-hmm. And it grew into sort of my just need to kind of look at situations and understand all of the connections and the things that happened to people, to situations that impacted why they were the way they were. And it started when I was, 11 years old, that stuff, and has been a piece of my, my personality and myself as a professional from probably before that. But that's when somebody called it out and noticed that about me.
Uh-huh. What response did you get from people as you were, doing these kind of cross-cultural exploration and getting to know them and their history and background? How was that responded to for you?
I mean, I would get impacted in pretty intense ways. One time we traveled in the South, and I became aware of, racial inequity that I'd never been exposed to here in Vermont. And it undid me. I had never encountered that before. And it made me really wonder more and more and more about why is that and how can people behave that way. And it fed a part of me that I don't think I ever would have encountered had I not had those experiences.
Mm-hmm. And so as you decided to learn more about, if you could just go with that theme there where you're exposed to that and you decided you wanted to learn more about it, how did that impact you and your sense of yourself as you were going through that exploration and learning more about the history and the injustices and all the things that you're pertaining to?
Well, it made me recognize that the slice of the world that I had been exposed to was just such a tiny little piece of, this corner of the world. And, in a obviously developmental way, but it made me recognize that there was so much I didn't know about a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so that recognition that there was so much you didn't know, what did that translate into then? What action did you take as a result?
Well, I started to ask people about stuff and notice different things that were happening. And it made me, always want to know the why behind the what, what was going on. And so those of you who are on my team have heard me say that 1,000 times, but that's really how I am in the world, like the why behind the what. If you want me to do something or to, make something happen, I need to know the why behind the what.
So how did people respond to you when you started getting into that with them and kind of unpacking the common assumptions, but going beyond that?
Well, I think it depends on the people that I was interacting with. Some people would get annoyed, like, will you just do what I'm telling you to do? But other people who had a little bit more willingness to go there, would come along for the ride. And we would find ourselves, exploring things or digging into things in a way that, really ended up giving us a much deeper, broader understanding collectively of what was happening and why it was happening. And, that then led us to a place where we started to try to think about different solutions, but it made me slow down in my process, in a lot of different areas, which is not something that I think we do all that easily in this work. But for me, that's really become something that, that I kind of lead with that. And it's a little tricky sometimes because,
Sure.
As a system, it's not always the easiest thing for us to tolerate.
Sure. So ultimately, if I had a film of your being curious, what would I be looking at? Like if I had a collection of clips of Barb as curious, what would that look like?
Well, a lot of questions, I would wonder with you about things and I might guess at what might be going on for you, or, observe different things or different, interactions that I've had with you. And I also would be pretty transparent about what's going on in my brain in that moment, and probably I would say it, and sometimes that's gotten me into trouble because, I'm pretty transparent. I'm willing to make myself vulnerable and say yeah, I don't really know. Let's figure it out together.
And so is being curious connected to some cherished ideas that you might have about what's important?
Say that again.
I'm getting to sort of a values aspect. So is being curious connected to some ideas that you have, some cherished ideas that are important about what's important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think my value is that I am just a part of a big whole. And, you know, I bring my best parts, but everybody else has their best parts too. And that we aren't going to get to our collective best parts unless we're willing to bring those things all together. So
it sounds like it's important to get to a place of collective better.
Yeah.
Right? Where does that come from?
I think, honestly, kind of a place of humility. I don't esteem myself to have all the answers, like pretty much ever. So I know that I want my best thinkers around me. And I think that collectively we're going to get to a better place than if I just say, this is what we're doing and go there.
So where do you hope being curious ultimately takes you and the people that you're with when you have that collective curiosity going and people are sharing back and forth and exposing and being humble and all that? Like, what are your hopes and dreams around that practice? What do you hope for?
Well, I guess for me, you know, if we are going to be looking for people to be sharing with us from, you know, some of the hardest parts of their life, then we have to be willing to model that and to bring that humility to that piece of our work to kind of enhance that ability to build those relationships. I mean, I think I focus on all of those things to bring to bear to relationships. To, you know, we're social workers, you know, we're family service workers. We bring ourselves to do our work. And I think that, you know, that curiosity and that, you know, that humility are parts of that. And that it all fuels the relationship. People can feel that when you bring those things, you know, in conversation with them.
So when people are feeling that and you're bringing those parts of the conversation all together, what do you ultimately hope for? Like what do you think the result is by bringing all, you know, that more thorough, thick sense of the whys and the curiosities and the unpacking?
I think for me, it's about creating a place to be safe, to be vulnerable, because the things, like, all of us have that voice in our head that tells us stuff, and sometimes it lies. So by being able to, like, bring yourself to a place of vulnerability, you can kind of create safety with the people around you, whether that's your colleagues or whether that's, you know, families.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, that's what it's about. It's about being able to be vulnerable, not have all the answers, to create safety so that you can, like, put those filters aside so you can actually move forward, whatever it is that you're trying to move forward.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Barb. I mean, that gives folks a little slice of what it would be like to get into have these kinds of conversations. I took some of those questions, some of them are just from my head and what I would normally do, and I intentionally pulled some of the questions from the practice interview questions, so you can see how to do that. There's eliciting, amplifying, intentions questions, values and hopes and dreams questions. And so again, that's what you're trying to do is really pull from that and get that sense of how do we move from practice to attentions to values and beliefs to hopes and dreams and commitments. Don't worry about having to touch on everything, but if you can have a conversation with the folks in your room, whether they're 3 or 4 people, and spend a little bit of time on that, and get that experience of what that's like for you, I think that's going to be really, really important. And my experience, I've done this in this Zoom environment. I've also done this in large conference rooms. And I'll tell you, this is one of the places where the Zoom environment is actually a little bit better, because when I put you in breakouts, it's just 3 of you in there, 4 of you in there. Whereas when we're breaking into a conference room, there tends to be tables and there's 20, 30, 40 groups of people having these types of conversations, often in pairs or in threes. And so then you have a lot of ambient noise. So in some ways, it's a little bit safer for folks to just have that conversation and not be impacted by what's going around. I think a couple of things that I want to identify are that you may find yourself wanting to jump out of the conversation, like start on strength and then go immediately to the shadow side of the strength. Because if I'm really good at hammering, right, and I hammer nails great, but I start hammering all kinds of other things that aren't nails, That's the shadow side. But don't go there. Don't let yourself go there. Focus on what you're good at, and do some self-observation about how easy is it for me to talk about that, because it may be difficult for other people too. And so allowing for that mental discipline and support from other people to happen to keep you focused on your strengths is I think something to get out of this experience, as well as to actually explore them. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break everyone into, actually Cassie's the one that's going to do that. She's going to break everyone into groups. And
Bob, sorry, this is Leslie, the chat watcher here. There's been a couple folks who are asking for a break before the breakout number 2. I don't know.
We can do the break before we break out. Thanks for introducing that, Leslie, and staying on top of it. I'm fine with doing the break. I was going to do the break after we come back. So I was going to give you about 40 minutes and then do a break. But I'll tell you what we could do is we can put you, Cassie, I need you to think this through with me. We can put folks into break and bring them back in an hour. And so you can do a break before, like each group could decide, we'll take our break before, we'll take our break after, but we'll have you come back at, I changed my clock, by the way, so I'm not saying 11:20. Right now it's 2:24, so we'll have you come back at like 3:15, 3:20. And that you can build in the break and like about 35 to 40 minutes for the activity. Does that make sense, Cassie? Just allow the flexibility?
Yep, I think that sounds great. So everybody got an email from me after this training started with the subject line. Now I can't remember exactly, but something about information for breakout 2. So there should be the questions, right, and instruction sheets. And then in your small groups, you can negotiate, whether you break first or break after, but we'll see you back here. Okay. Let's see. Here you go.
It looks like from the chat box that some folks were still in the midst of the activity and got cut off. I'm sorry you got cut off. And I'm glad that you were engaged in that sort of stuff and you didn't see the prompts that you're going to get cut off. So, that's a mixed bag. Sorry you didn't feel the sense to complete it, but you get many opportunities to replicate this and practice it and take it farther. So we have just about everybody back. I see a couple of people are still coming, but let's we saw the prompts just get talking. That's nice. Good for you. So let's kind of review what a couple of things are going to happen here. First of all, I want to elicit any ideas that you'd like to share in the chat box for applications for this strength conversation. Like where could you see this fitting into practice? Your units, your regions, whatever. What ideas? So folks can pop that in. That would be great to see your ideas. And then Cassie's going to load a poll, which we'll get some quick answers on. So why don't you go ahead and do that, Cassie? We'll do those things while people are rejoining. And
there you go.
There it is.
Oh, cool.
Yes,
you guys can't see it yet, can you?
Like
so we're about 2/3 complete. I'm gonna wait till we get a little closer to 100%. Is the suspense killing you? We're at 78%.
I think it's clear where it's going to end up, but just reading off the chat, some folks for the ideas: engaging teams, creating plans with families, youth development plans of care, foster parents, youth parents for case plans, creating profiles for recruitment with children for adoptive placements, developing goals for performance evaluations, and focusing on strengths. Yay. Relationship building, profiles of children searching for a permanent home. Yeah, I think a lot of times I've seen in those profiles, you know, are things like, you know, cute smile, great sense of humor, all that kind of stuff. And those things are cool, but being able to attach some purpose and history and agency to what people do and why they do it can really help round out and validate them. The other thing, when you're having conversations with young people or anyone for that matter, and you're talking about strengths, is folks often feel like if there's a group of 8 or 9 that, oh, I can't say it because somebody already said that. And you can have your own experience of the same strength when you're looking at purposes and intentions. So you can say, I see that strength through this lens with you, and have some engagement around that. And that way you don't feel like it's so superficial that you can't replicate it because, you know, you feel like it's invalidating in some ways. So I see other ideas: supervision, family safety meetings, discuss when you're working towards closure. Great idea. Helping others believe in themselves to find motivation to make scary changes. Strengths discussions can be helpful during family time, circle time, so they can spend a few minutes lifting each other up and experience something positive together. Yeah, you know, starting with these kinds of things or appreciative inquiry to start meetings can really separate and create a tone that's much more uplifting. And building on strengths will naturally improve or any challenges or areas that need improvement. So it looks like we're about good with the poll, and 58% of you are completely confident that you can improve your engagement with families by at least 20% in the next year, and 42% of you are fairly confident that you can do that, and nobody copped to being not confident. So that's good, and I hope that's true. And so I guess one of the things I'd like to ask is, because we're going to get into this piece that Barb started, kind of opened with, is how would we measure that? So in thinking about how you can improve your engagement, what would you look for? Are there measurements you would look for that would tell you that your engagement is improved? And so I invite you to type those in, and then I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, and we have a particular slide of data that Barb just got yesterday, and we'll get a chance to share that too. So I'm going to share my screen. Back to the PowerPoint. So this is sort of the end of the intentional strengths conversation. And this was in the handout. So the idea of the intentional strengths is that there's both a landscape of action and a landscape of identity to explore, and you can explore both of those. And that was inherent in the questions that you saw. And that there's a connection to network building, right? It challenges that I've got no one notion, that the understandings are always peopled. It challenges those singular versions of youth and caregivers as dysfunctional, and identifies history of skills and abilities to support the goals of the network. So that's just thinking about how can you translate this from this individual practice to a relationship building practice amongst people. One of the ways that we've seen the intentional strengths exercise being really useful is for folks to explore and develop relationships within networks and talk about their strengths and be able to recognize for their strengths. Sometimes that helps combat the tensions that may be inherent in some networks. So then the principles of intentional strengths: to see people as what they do, not who they are. to fit strengths into a history of a life lived, and to connect strengths to personal agency. So that was the poll question. And then we get to what does our current data tell us? And I asked you to identify what can we pay attention to or to measure beyond placement with kin. That was Barb's curious question that she identified in advance. And here's that slide, Barb, that you're referencing. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you see here?
Okay, so true confessions. I got a whole bunch of people in my screen that are blocking my numbers here. Oh wait, I'll use this one. Never mind. You can leave the people alone. All right. So this is the data point that we will be refocusing on. I guess it's always been, something that we've attended to in our child and family service review. We're always looking at the percentage of placements with kin, and you'll see this labeled as connected with the Diligent Recruitment Project, and it is, because they're aligned. And the last time we were together in May, we presented on this this same data, and I'm happy to report we've had a little smidge of a bump, to the positive. We've gone up a couple of percentage points. But when I look at this number, and being curious, I already only tells us a little bit of the story. And so when I start to think about this, it's sort of like, okay, so, we can measure the percentage of children in kinship placements, but that's only a piece of what we need to know about when we think about the scope of our work with kin. And so another figure that I expect will become a consistent part of this conversation is the incorporation of information related to our conditional custody cases, because we know a lot of those are also kin. So I feel like those two data points taken together provides a little bit more of a complete picture, but still not the total picture. And so, part of why I wanted to present this is like, this gets us a little ways down the path, but there's more to the story than what this presents. So we do have this data available, broken out by district. And those of you who are already onboarded with Diligent Recruitment, that's part of the ongoing data set that you get. And those of you that aren't, sorry, no, I'm kidding. You'll get that data as well. We'll make sure, as we move into the working with kin focused indicator, obviously you'll have it as a focus as well, just like everybody else does. So it'll be made available to you. And those conversations, we're going to be teeing those up. I believe it's going to be at one of the later DLT meetings in August. There's a prompt in the chat, and it breaks out these, I think, is there a way, Bob, to like scroll down a smidge? Because the living arrangements at the top, the abbreviations are spelled out at the bottom. Nope, you don't have that on your slide?
No, it's not on the slide.
Okay, I can do it. So from the left, AD is adoptive home, not finalized. FH is foster home, that would be non-relative. GH is group home, which we've categorized as no on-site school connected to that program. IL is independent living. IN is an institution, which would be a hospital setting, and I believe Woodside falls under that category as well. IR is intensive residential, and that includes settings where there is an on-site school. RE is relative, and RA is the runaway category. There's actually a CL, which doesn't show up on this, but that's college. So I started to say that, we do have this, this broken out by district, and you did see that the last time we were together. I just didn't have the Q1 of the calendar year available for you for that level of detail, but it's coming. So there it is.
Okay. So when Barb and I were going back and forth a little bit about this and trying to think of, all right, so what are some ideas for supporting kin placement and relationships? And coincidentally, or at least associated with this, is how would you know? And so the importance of listening to understand how caring for a relative child impacts the kin caregiver. Like, how do you tune into those conversations? Are you creating good space for that? Are you trying to tap into the experience of the strain that creates for families while they're doing that, and recognizing that strain has to be supported and validated, not just ignored, right? Which sometimes we can step over those sorts of things and not be curious about it. Using family team meetings and shared parenting meetings as a way to engage. So there's opportunities already in place to engage. How do you take those opportunities to engage and inquire and connect? And sometimes when we get into meetings, it's just like we got to have the meeting and then we got to go do something else, and we miss the opportunity to engage. So it's a way to be thinking about it, and then also to ask yourselves, how do I know? Or if you're a supervisor or a manager, how do I know my people know? Or how do I know what they're doing? Effectively incorporating youth into their own permanency planning. I think that was in your data from last time. That was thing you felt least confident about, that you're not consistently incorporating youth into their own planning. And so what are some of those strategies, inclusive of intentional strengths? What are some of those strategies you can utilize to increase the amount and the effectiveness of incorporating youth and engaging youth in there? And identifying the informal network and continuing to help to grow and develop that and enhance the relationship so that it forms, it actually works as a network as opposed to a collection of separate connections. Because a collection of separate connections is not a network. And you have to sometimes, with some families and some networks, they just take form and you just have to get out of the way. But with other ones, sometimes you have to be intentional about the relationship development because there's a history of conflict or there's a lack of relational connection historically, and you're bringing these people together. So then what are some of the ways and who are the folks that can help do that? It doesn't all of these have to fall on you as the worker, but how do you at least bring that up and support their development, right? Yeah. So those are just some of the ideas that are present, but we're curious, and this will be an ongoing conversation piece for Barb and the group to be looking at how do you know, and what else can you do, and how do we keep talking about and sharing kind of successes along with and experiments, small tests of change around these things so that we are consistently getting better at it. Vermont is getting better at it, both regionally and statewide. Barb, anything you'd like to add there?
I was thinking also just about, the challenges that we have, extracting data that we've entered into our system. But I know that there are other measures that we have available to us. For example, I know once upon a time, and I don't know if it's still happening, but when we would host family safety planning meetings, we would count the number of extended family that were present, and we were paying attention to that. And that information was being shared. That's a measure that you could look at, put a stake in the ground now about how often those are happening, and then take a look at it periodically to see, are you having more of those, and are you reaching a broader, broader network? So that's just one example that I've been thinking of. But I think that this conversation, really thinking about, thinking beyond the percentage, is something that I want to encourage us to look at, because I think that that's just one measure that we're required to report out on, but it's not the best one.
Yeah.
So
yeah. You want to include it in your portfolio, but you can't rely on it solely, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really tell you about the practice. It tells you about a particular result.
Well, and I think we also know of situations where, we've not recommended a certain placement with a certain kin, and the court has gone ahead and done that. And so,
Sure.
feels weird to count that as like, yay, us, we placed with kin when we had big reservations. You know, we maybe would have wanted to do some other placement with another kin, you know, so I think we just have to pay attention to, you know, the numbers only tell us so much.
Well, and I know in COVID, there's a few jurisdictions I was working with where all of a sudden there were living situations being created with relatives that were heretofore rejected because everyone panicked and young people were being discharged from large population sites that were worried that they were becoming infected or dangerous to young people. And so all of a sudden kids were getting sent to grandma that weren't going there before. And many of those started working really well. So it was that, you know, we had a recommendation against that, and then we had to step back and learn. There was another, I don't know if you all remember some of the big fires that were happening in California in the Chico area a couple of years ago. It decimated, you know, many places, businesses, homes, etc. It burned down a few shelters that young people had been utilized, whether they're runaway shelters or just sort of that child welfare short-term shelter kind of thing. And most of those young people ended up going to their family and doing fine. And it was that reinforcement of sometimes we have things in our lens that prevents us from having young people live with their families, and provided they get some support and services and you know, both formal and informal network support, these things can work. And so we have in our head the notion of why something is good or isn't good. And when things change suddenly, it's an opportunity for us to step back and look at, okay, we weren't in favor of something. How's it working? Or we were in favor of something. How is it working? Because we may start to see it differently over time. And it's these kind of large, impactful situations that create that opportunity to learn, whereas generally we're going to stay with what we know and what we believe in. Anything else, Barb?
I'm all good.
All good. All right. So I want to take you through a real quick piece of process mapping. I imagine some of you are familiar with it and know this. There's a link to process mapping. In particular, there's lots of different styles of process mapping. There are businesses that make lots of money consulting and doing process mapping. I just pulled something that was relatively quick and easy, and it was applied to a medical setting. So I think it translates pretty well to a child welfare setting. But I've seen and participated in a bunch of these over the years, and have found it be really helpful and insightful, enlightening even to folks participating. So I wanted to take you through it, to explain it. I put it all on one slide, but again, it's there'll be a link to you know, a page that's a little bit more descriptive. So the idea of a process map is to really go through an experience, and one of the counties in California I'm currently working with is wanting to redesign their child and family team protocol. And child and family teams are prescribed in California based upon a legal finding that a young person did not have enough voice in their plan. And so that requires on a regular basis for child and family teams to occur. The unfortunate part about that is that the practice is that you can sometimes have 15 people in a room. The child may or may not be there. A family member may or may not be there, and they're still calling it child and family team. So it's a multidisciplinary team where the young person may be invited and may have a group of connections and even a network present, but not necessarily, which was not the intent of the legislation. So that's one of the struggles around transforming your practice. But so the idea is that this county was doing was, let's make sure that we have family present with a significant voice on both sides of the family, or multiple sides of the family, depending upon the complexity, that are actually helping us to determine whether or not young people need to come into care and where they live and what their plan is. And let's make sure family is consistently present in that. So they constructed what their current system looked like, and then what they would like for it to look like. And so they started with, here, you know, from the very first call, here's what's supposed to happen. and started to identify who had responsibilities and roles from both within the agency as well as the partners to make decisions around that, and where were they involving family, and how were they getting family to the table, who had the responsibility and the authority and those sorts of things. So they then started to map out what does it look like and where would they like it to look like. And so once you get the role, and it's really important, I think, not to just limit this to a handful of managers that are internal to the system, but to really get the folks that are doing the work on a regular basis and say, because sometimes as managers, we think we know what's happened, and then we get the experience of the people that are doing it over and over again and say, yeah, 40 or 50% of the time, actually, this is what happens. And that's really important to try and capture, as well as the partner's response. Like what's happening, and here's what we think is happening when your piece is going in, but what is actually happening from your perspective. And to map that out, and then to make sure that that looks like that's what's happening. And then you can reconstruct it and then start, saying, well, what I'd rather have in order to meet the values and goals of us is to make sure that family are involved in all these decisions, is what we need to do is this instead of what we already have, and then start replacing. And then it gives you an opportunity to develop practice, protocol, relationships, contracts, etc. And that's how you get from where you are to where you want to be. It can take a little bit of time, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for co-learning here and co-creation amongst all partners. And ultimately, it will bust some preconceived notions about what's supposed to happen and what actually happens. Okay. So, that's a very broad brushstroke perspective about what process mapping is, or a description about what process mapping is. Again, there's a handout that gives you more into detail. I really encourage this because, again, there's it's this joint effort that usually creates some mutual understanding in ways that weren't created before, where one set of folks were asserting that something's supposed to happen, and somebody else was saying, well, that isn't really what happens, and it just lays there, as opposed to trying to co-create, this is what we want it to look like, and here's how the contracts have to work, here's how the communication has to work, here's what the forms have to be, here's what the procedure has to be, here's how the court's involved, all those sorts of things. And it's probably a helpful thing to do on a general basis anyway, periodically, but especially if you're trying to reconstruct practice in a particular area. So it could be back-end practice. It could be, kids that have been in care for a long time that are bouncing from place to place to place. And one of the places I'm working with is also reconstructing that. So on what basis are young people being sent to residential centers and group homes? Who's making those decisions? What's the information? Have they done the family finding in the past? Like all those sorts of things to kind of reconstruct what that could look like. So we stop unnecessarily sending young people there. And then we have ways for, once they go into those situations, to get them back into their communities and in family-based settings, which are going to be much better for them. They may need a lot of support to get there. So then what's the support, and how do we have to construct that support? Ultimately, so trying to reduce and eliminate situations where we're not meeting kids' needs. And a lot of these situations, kids' needs are not being met, and their behavior is telling us that their needs aren't being met. But historically, we've looked at it as they're being non-compliant, as opposed to being as telling us that their needs aren't being met. So that's a brief background of the process mapping. I'm going to take you to the final breakout session, and there's the description on the slides here, but I'm actually going to end the slideshow and share share the handout document that you can reference.
And so this breakout will send you back to we think, back to the groups you were in the first time. Yeah. And so if you were a facilitator or a note taker in that first group, it's that same process again. We'd ask you to do it again for this breakout, number 3.
Thanks, Cassie. So basically 2 sets of questions here again. The first is, given that alignment is so important, can you make some plans, particularly some steps and actions to increase alignment with a minimum of 2 partners? Like, so what can you do over the next 30 to 60 days to increase the alignment, to improve engagement with families so that more family members are consistently participating, and to maintain a consistent focus of regional leadership and staff on the topic through the rest of the year? So it doesn't, like Barb said, go into the kind of initiative fatigue situation and it's left behind. So how do you maintain a focus on this? So some of you have been able to do that between May and July, and maybe others haven't been. And so it's an opportunity to think through, so what do we have to do? How do we have to incorporate this in our regular practice and communication so that we maintain a focus on it? Then the second set of questions are like, all right, so if we're going to do this, what's the training or support you need to meet your goals? And, you know, some of that may be within your system. Some of that may be back and forth. Barb and I and some of the other folks are having conversations about, can we perhaps do some skill-based stuff with small sets of groups, probably focusing at least at first on supervisors and maybe a combination of supervisors within the providers and the public agency. But that, you know, I think that's in process over the next couple of months. And then how can you share these learnings with other regions? So again, that learning organization question of just in the way that we did this earlier today, where folks shared a couple of their ideas, 3-4 minutes of a presentation that identified, you know, some things that they didn't expect, and their feelings associated with it. So that's the task. We're going to give you till 4:20, and then we'll come back and do a quick wrap and then close it for the day. Okay. As Cassie said, you'll go back to, the intent is you'll go back to the group you were first in the beginning of the day.
And if you ended up in a funny group the first time and you had to come back out, that might happen again. So we'll deal with that after. But magically, hopefully, the vast majority of you are going to go to the right place right now.
Folks, let's kind of wrap up. So first of all, I know Barb is particularly interested in all of your machinations and the magic that you were all just making happen that was interrupted unexpectedly. So Barb wants all those details.
I'm putting my business in the chat box.
So make sure that you send the summary of all the first and third breakout, and along with any other ideas, and Cassie will be sending evaluations and other materials, which I'll give her a chance to describe. But first of all, what I'd like to do is let's create opportunity for some quick shout outs. So first, how about to Krista, who put together the slides earlier on in the presentation and facilitated that piece. So go ahead and hit your space bar or unmute yourself real quick. And how about some raucous shout outs to Krista?
Good job, Krista.
Thank you. Yay, thank you so much.
Way to go.
Nice work.
Even calling Krista, that's nice. Okay. And secondly, how about to Barb for jumping in, doing all kinds of stuff and facilitating and presenting and being the volunteer with me around the sharing. That was not rehearsed. That was like, I told her what we do, but there was zero rehearsal on that. So 1, 2, 3, woohoo, Barb.
Great job. Nice going. Good job, Barb.
You go, Barb.
And then finally, Cassie's holding this all together. Like, none of this stuff happens without Cassie, and she's got a crew behind her that she references frequently, but she's the one that was doing the problem solving and the troubleshooting here that, you know, throughout the whole thing, as well as keeping us on track. So 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Cassie. Woohoo!
Good job, Cassie.
Thanks, Cassie. Nice work.
Great breakout rooms, Cassie.
Nice.
Bob.
Say it again.
What about Bob?
No, what about?
Yes.
That was a movie.
Great job, Bob. Yay,
Awesome. It was a
Thanks,
great
Bob.
day.
Thank you, Bob.
Nice work.
Thanks, Bob.
All the way around. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're totally welcome. It was a pleasure. You guys do great with your breakouts. And so I was confident that we could construct those again. And the feedback from last time was really positive. And you know, if you have suggestions for how we make this kind of thing better, always in the learning mode. So don't hesitate. You all are doing some great work. I want to continue to encourage you to continuously improve what you're doing and to share and learn with each other. I think there's going to be some opportunities for me to interface with at least some of you over the next couple of months, and then who knows beyond that. But I think you should all be proud of what you're doing, because you're doing some great stuff, and others will have the chance to learn from you. So keep going, keep on keeping on, I think is the best thing I can say. Barb, Cassie, final thoughts?
No, I think thank you so much for coming, being patient with technology. There's an email with an evaluation link, which is really helpful to us, and you don't need to do it today. You can do it tomorrow. And then all the resources that we talked about today are in there, including a link to Bob's podcast. So
let's have a conversation.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Be well, be safe.
Bye.